And in this video, we're going to be looking at a bit of an introduction to the study of the Old Testament. It may surprise you to know that the Bible is not evenly divided between the Old Testament and the New Testament. In fact, the Old Testament makes up 75% of the Bible, 3/4. So it's a little bit unfortunate that many people know the Old Testament a little bit less than they do the New Testament. And it may not surprise you to learn that the Old Testament and really the whole Bible were not written in your first language. The Old Testament is actually written in two languages, Hebrew and Aramaic. The overwhelming percentage in Hebrew and just a few verses here and there in Aramaic. And a little bit of what Hebrew sounds like. Genesis 1:1 in Hebrew sounds like this. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, which of course in English means, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But when we study the Old Testament in an academic sort of way, one of the first things we notice is that the books are not quite in the same order that we're used to from just non-academic reading of the Old Testament, like in church, for example. The Old Testament in the Hebrew ordering of the books is divided up into three sections. The first is called the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. This word is usually translated law, but that's not a completely accurate way to translate this word. But this includes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the 5 books that are connected with Moses. And it goes from the creation of the world to just before the children of Israel enter the Promised Land. But then there's a major difference because the second section of the Hebrew ordering of the books is called the prophets. And this includes some of the things that we call the historical books. The former prophets, so-called, include Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. You'll notice that Ruth and Esther are not in that list. And the latter prophets include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea to Malachi. And what 2 books are that we usually associate with the prophets are missing from that list? Well, that's right. The answer is there's no Lamentations and there's no Daniel. And Ruth and Esther and Lamentations and Daniel, along with Psalms and Proverbs and Job and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah, they are in a section called the Writings, which includes everything else, the things that are not in the Torah or not listed among the prophets. And so it includes much of the wisdom traditions and some of the later writings of the Old Testament. So to conclude, the Old Testament that we study in English has all of the same books as the Hebrew Bible, but the Hebrew Bible puts them in a slightly different order, which would give us a little bit of an idea of how we can study these books, because they're given in a different order. That indicates something of how the editors or those who brought the Bible together think about these books. So we'll see you next time.